Ron, in addition to NBC's reporting about the delays in implementing these state-of-the-art barriers, the New York Times is reporting today that New Orleans officials were warned way back in 2019 about the faulty bollards, which were under repair when this attack happened. What's your view of this barricade issue and why there wasn't a better contingency plan in place?
Well, it seems clear the city has not answered that question either. I mean, these types of reports indicate that this is a 4 or 5 year problem in the development. Having spent 25 years of my career in New Orleans and walking a beat on Bourbon Street, the police department can only operate with the equipment that it's given after it's asked for. So I think the city of New Orleans has some questions to answer for the public.
Why weren't those big, hard barriers up?
It's hard to know because nobody seems to be saying right now. The first press conference was difficult to understand some of the messaging that was going on. I think the continued questions of where were these, how were they paid for, when did they not work, when did they work, and why weren't they being used? The Super Bowl is a different SEER level response from the federal government. The Sugar Bowl is not quite as high as a response. Nonetheless, the public expects to be safe.
Frank, regarding the attacker's route during this specific attack, we know it started when he drove around a police car onto the sidewalk to enter Bourbon Street. Are there procedures in place to respond immediately in a scenario like this? And does it look like those types of procedures were implemented?
It's hard to tell right now. There needs to be a comprehensive, independent investigation, whether that's from the state authorities or whether they hire a reputable private firm to come in and do the after action. The people of the state need to reestablish their belief in the credibility of the department. And right now, I don't think that's there. So you can have protocols to do rapid response. There may be rapid response teams right there, likely were. The question is whether they implement the protocol. Having them in place and executing on the protocol are two different things. And I think some of the superintendents, the current superintendent's responses to, hey, we're not about fixing blame, and no, I didn't know we had these L-shaped Archer barriers. That's not good. It's not good. People need some answers. And I wanted, with all of this kind of analysis, I think it's really important to point out that the officers on the street, on the scene, that ran toward the gunshots, ran toward the problem, and then neutralized the suspect need to be awarded. That should not be lost. Their heroism should not be lost as we discuss and critique what happened.
That's a good point, and there were a lot of heroes that day. Could have been even worse, sadly. Frank, let's talk about the suspect and this attacker, I should say. We are learning more and more about his background. NBC News really paints a picture of someone who went from a model soldier to ISIS supporter. We know he did have marriage troubles. He had financial troubles. For investigators in the intel community, how important is it to determine the source of his radicalization, and how will that information be used?
We've got a homegrown violent extremism problem in the United States. So every one of these helps the intelligence and law enforcement community understand what's happening out there. There are some of the commonalities with him, and then there are some things that are different. Many people think once they hear, oh, 100% driven by ISIS motivation, they kind of say, okay, that's the end of the story. But the reality is that there's a lot more to every story of radicalization. It's not just becoming a true believer in a cause. If you're willing to martyr yourself for something, there's a whole lot of other things going on in your life. And you mentioned some of them. Pretty severe financial problems, 2 divorces, a restraining order. Even if you study the 9/11 hijackers, you see, yes, they were true believers, but why did they decide to really give up their lives? And you find bleak prospects in their future, no jobs in their future, economic issues. That's all a factor that helps the community understand how we might mitigate or prevent this moving forward.
Ron, here's what the younger brother of the attacker told our affiliate KPRC. Listen.
It's a complete curveball to, how I know him, and how I remember him. The way I know him is being kind, loving, caring, compassionate, charismatic, funny, smart. I understand, people want answers, but we're just as puzzled as the rest of the world.
Ron, someone who on the surface appears to be your usual upstanding citizen, described here as kind, loving, caring, but then behind the scenes becomes radicalized. How does law enforcement even pick up that scent? Can you keep someone like this from falling through the cracks?
Well, we see this happen in so many different types of crimes in America, and this one it's highlighted around the issue of ISIS, et cetera. When people make these decisions to harm others, there may be some clues. We've often learned of a term called leakage, where people will start messaging to friends, family, or others that they may be contemplating danger against themselves or others. Much of that's done at a level not in front of local law enforcement. When you think about the ubiquitousness of the dark web, of the internet, of social media, local law enforcement, and I was also a state police chief at one time, we have some resources and fusion centers which came after 911. But a lot of this internet diving to understand the difference between protected free speech and speech that intimates that someone is going to hurt themselves or other is what makes the difference for law enforcement at either federal, state, or local level to engage this person. And there's a lot of opportunity to engage them when they say or leak something that would indicate on any forum that they intend to hurt themselves or others.